How we doing today? Good. I'm really excited to get a few minutes to speak with you today. My name is Joe Trainor, and I'm the interim dean at the Biden School of Public Policy Administration, where we are the proud home of the SNF Ithaca initiative, bringing the summit to you today in partnership with IMED and, of course, with the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. In just a few minutes here, we're going to be joined by CNN presidential historian Dr. Douglas Brinkley and the Biden School's SNF Ithaca director, Tim Shaffer. And they're going to focus our attention a little bit today. They're going to focus us on how presidencies have both shaped and been shaped by the media. Before we bring them out, though, I'm happy to be able to just take a few minutes to in between sessions to talk to you. And quite frankly, I'm really humbled to be here, to be able to speak among this amazing group of folks, this amazing group of accomplished individuals that we've heard from today. The Media and Democracy Summit has been amazing. It feels like a great honor for us at UD and at the Biden School to be participating and to be part of this initiative. It feels like I'm attending a master class. I've learned so much in the last couple of days, so much in the last couple of sessions, so many ideas, and I've enjoyed these conversations more than I can express. I really want to thank all the speakers who've decided to spend their time and share their talent with us. We're lucky to have so many accomplished folks, so much great and deep insight. Even more, I'm especially grateful for the challenge that our panelists have expressed to us in the last couple of days to think differently about our role as citizens and to think differently about our role as leaders in institutions. As the interim dean here at the Biden School, I've been thinking a lot of these last couple of months about what our school's responsibilities and obligations are to our local communities, to the state of Delaware, to the nation, and even the world, especially given that we are a named Presidential School of Public Policy and Administration. That naming carries with it a pretty weighty responsibility, one we share with other schools also named for presidents, like the Kennedy School, the Ford School, the Bush School, the LBJ School, the Clinton School, those that are working to extend the legacies of presidents, and more importantly, the office of the presidency itself. The promises that are made by presidents are extended through us. So every president, as they take the oath of office, they promise to preserve, protect, and defend our Constitution. And by extension, they also are promising to protect our democracy. And that's a weighty commitment. That's one that's been shared by generations, and it's been shared across administrations. At the Biden School, we really embrace this role. We wholeheartedly believe that it's part of our mission to prepare that next generation of leaders. Among many things that we're working on, this event fits into some of the key activities that we're doing to advance that responsibility. Through our educational mission, events like this summit, we're building on a 60-year legacy of helping students take responsibility for the information that they consume by providing them with critical thinking skills. We need to expect more of ourselves in the times that we are facing now. As we face changes in technology, as we face new ways that information come to us, I think it's important to recognize that critical thinking skills are more important than they ever were. And that those critical thinking skills are especially valued or uniquely valued in democratic institutions when they're functioning at their best. The second thing I think we do with our students is that we remind them that our governmental institutions, our governmental systems are something that we made. There's something that we've created. There's something that we continue to create every day through either action or inaction. And while there are real power dynamics and complications, and we have the power as people within democracies to shape and change those systems in ways that we think are important, in ways that we think reflect the values that we hold. Third, we ask our students to bravely engage across differences, and that includes entrenched, deep divides. We're teaching students that civil discourse is civic responsibility. We remind them that there is more that unites us than divides us. And we reinforce the value of empathy, the idea that putting yourself in someone else's position is really important. And the last thing we ask people to engage, to step up in their communities. We genuinely believe something that I think has been repeated over and over many times in our meeting today, and that's that democracy is something that has to be done. Sometimes we say the opposite of good is not always evil. The opposite of good is sometimes apathy, the lack of action. If we're going to have the world that we want, the world we deserve, the world that we are striving for, we need people to stand up and act. Because of the shared mission to protect democracy through action, through engagement, through discourse, through critical understanding of media systems, we've really come into partnership, and we have this amazing shared mission with the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, who's partnered with us on the SNF Ithaca initiative and has really helped to make events like this one possible. Thanks to SNF President Andreas Dracopoulos for your vision, for your commitment, and for your shared values with us. Also, thank you to Anna and the entire team at IMED who's been our amazing partners in putting this together, in creating so much content and creating such a stimulating set of talks, conversations, thought experiments. It's really enhanced the experience here, and I just can't tell you how grateful we are for that partnership. What we're doing here today, folks, is noble work. I know that we always think of it that way, but it is. It's engaging some of the most challenging issues in our time, and it is noble to step up and engage those issues. Finally, I want to thank everyone here in the audience and the folks that are here virtually online for the work that you will do from this moment on. Because this is a conversation, this is a dialogue, this is a set of discussions, but the true measure of the value of what we've done today is not that. It's the next steps. It's the way that each and every one of you will step up, hopefully, in your own specific way. And with that, I think I've said enough. You're not really here to listen to me, but it is my absolute honor to introduce someone who has rapidly become a friend and a mentor, the absolutely dynamic, intelligent, and inspiring leader, our very own Biden Institute Chair, Valerie Biden Owens.
So serious. Well, we have a serious topic, which is media and democracy, but I'm going to try to make it okay, can you see me this way, or is it better this way? Better, want me to be tall? Okay, because I'm mighty powerful, you know, I can get up here. So, hi, everybody. Thank you for being here for this important, okay, discussion exploring media and the presidency, which I happen to have a very keen interest in. But I'm going to be quiet and just introduce the two principles. We can talk later about it. We have the perfect guide today for media and democracy, and that is Dr. Douglas Brinkley. And he's not only a distinguished presidential historian, but he is also a master storyteller. And his books, when you read them, they tell about the history, but they also tell about the person, the president who is making that history. He has, I'm on one of his books now, on Franklin Roosevelt, and which is really strange. It's my bedside reading, Franklin Roosevelt and Brinkley, go figure, but it's what I do. And the book cover has Franklin Roosevelt touching the bark of a tree. And every time I think of Franklin Roosevelt, I think of him in the Depression, and what he did for America, bringing us out of the Depression, what he did in the World War II, and how he led our country. I never think of him as a tree hugger. And it is amazing. That's a whole different aspect. He was a conservationist, which I found extremely interesting. Anyway, his books are about a lot more than just that history at that moment. He has 6 books in the New York Times Notable Books of the Year, and 7 of his books are the New York Times bestseller. He serves as the chair of Catherine Sandoff Brown Chair in Humanities and professor at Rice University. And beyond his achievements of what he does, what truly stands out is that, again, he makes his audience, the kids that he teaches, and you'll see today his audience, he allows you to feel a personal connection with these presidents, that they're just not figureheads. His work is about the past, but it is deeply resonant today with our contemporary issues because, we are living in a world where the media is trying to remake the president, and at the same time, the president's trying to change the media landscape. So it's a topic of immense importance, and I'm glad he's here to enlighten us and to help us figure out how do we navigate this, because we are in difficult times. I'm preaching to the choir. So I'm going to ask Dr. Douglas Brinkley to come out, and our own Dr. Tim Shaffer, who you've seen, will be doing the interviewing, because I can't, because I am very one-sided in my opinions. All right, so gentlemen, where the hell are you? Roll call, there they are.
Hi, guys.
Well, this is not the thing I ever expect to do, but here we are. Thank you so much for all coming this afternoon for this conversation. And for those of you who have been here throughout the summit, I think in some ways we'll probably touch on some of the themes that have been mentioned earlier, but we're really going to talk in a fairly focused way about the media and the presidency. So I just want to say thank you to you for joining us here at this really pivotal moment, as Valerie was just noting, in kind of the state of democracy here in the United States. She, read some of the accolades, and in so many ways, you've been such a force thinking about the presidency particularly. So I want to ask you the first question: why in the heck do you care about the presidency so much? Why have you spent as much of your time, your scholarship, focusing on this one position in particular?
I want to first just say thank you to Valerie. I mean, we're going to, as a historical community, pick her as the best first sister ever, because she's remarkable, and I love what the Biden School's doing, and in the University of Delaware is tremendous. I grew up in Ohio, and we claim to be the mother of presidents. That was the slogan I was taught. We had 8 presidents from Ohio. I grew up in a town called Perrysburg. Just down a country road was, Rutherford B. Hayes's home. My parents would take me to the birthplace of Ulysses S. Grant, or, visit Warren Harding's tomb, things like this. But it was fun. And in school, I did papers about those Ohio presidents. And I still take a kind of pride in my Buckeye State. I went to the Ohio State University undergraduate, that we had produced that many. So I got very interested in it. But in a professional career, after I did my doctorate at Georgetown, I recognized that we're a very diverse country. I mean, the novelist Thomas Wolfe used to talk about 1 billion forms of America. And you can write about a lot of cultures and subcultures, but we really think about presidents by their era. We'll talk about the Kennedy years or the Johnson years or, the Reagan years, because they're a unifier. So it's a way to communicate when you talk about the presidency to American people with a lot of shorthand, which doesn't often happen if you're going to write about a Supreme Court justice necessarily, or a senator or a governor.
So just a shout out to Ohioans here on the stage, right? And I too have always appreciated that sense of place and how it's shaped these monumental figures in a lot of ways. So let's kind of think then about the last 100 plus or so years. What's been the relationship between the presidency and the media? How have you seen it evolve over time, right? You have focused on some of those key figures, but in that kind of long arc of history, how has that relationship either been established and how has it changed?
Everything of our modernity really began with Theodore Roosevelt. He was president in 1901 to 1909. And when TR was president, America changed. It was the beginning of the American century, but also his ability to work the press. No president I've studied is better than Theodore Roosevelt at it. Why? What did he do? First off, Theodore Roosevelt being many things in his 60 years, but he was a writer and he wrote 35 books. As he did, there are 150,000 letters of TR. Historians read other people's mail for a living. And when you weigh in on Theodore Roosevelt, which I've done and written about him, and I'm on a board of the library with TR, it's remarkable the power of being a fellow writer. So he would read every day anything and everything he could, but then he would track down the writer, not usually to criticize the writer, but to tell them how great they are. He was full of flattery to journalists. Oh, what a great story you did on that. But what a bully story on the front page of the paper. Your book is remarkable. And it inflated the egos of writers, and he would co-opt some that way. He became the closest friends to the cartoonist of his day. We have Jordan Klepper coming here and the great comedians of our time, but he would do that they would travel with him, be with him at top White House dinners, like President Biden recently was, with the president of Kenya. At a dinner like that, there would be cartoonists sprinkled in, because before really radio or TV, the cartoonist could deliver a wallop, and TR used those cartoonists to be a punch at his political opponents. But, he listened and read. So when he read, I'm just picking one of many, but when he read Upton Sinclair's book, The Jungle, about the stockyards of Chicago, how horrible the meatpacking industry was, the lack of sanitary conditions and all, Theodore Roosevelt read the book. And Upton Sinclair was not of the political persuasion of TR. He was a socialist writer, not somebody that would be a normal ally of Roosevelt, but he said, I love that book, and he embraced it. You see, John F. Kennedy did that with Rachel Carson when she wrote Silent Spring in 1962, expanding conservation to telling all of us that your kids can be sick. Environment's a public health issue. If you're getting sick swimming in a lake, you're getting sick, by playing in a playground, you're getting, toxins in your life. And it's more than saving national parks, conservation, or creating state parks. It's public health. And Kennedy got behind that. So there are these key moments when a book or an expose comes out that presidents can grab onto. And Kennedy did that with Guns of August to Barbara Tuchman during foreign policy. So it's about collaboration and getting a great relationship. TR is number one at that, in my view, even though we can talk about others that were awful good at it.
Well, let's do that. Who else was awful good at it?
Who wasn't good was Woodrow Wilson in the end. Even though he was also a writer, he didn't enjoy the the words. He was much more had a legalistic political mind, Wilson. But, you know, who was just utterly remarkable also was FDR. And Roosevelt's style, little like TR. I mean, look, anytime you want to ever know about Theodore and FDR, I mean, FDR is the only a fifth cousin, so it's kind of distance. But Theodore Roosevelt, you know, grew up in New York, FDR grew up in New York. Theodore Roosevelt went to Harvard, FDR goes to Harvard. Theodore Roosevelt was, governor of New York, FDR governor of New York. Theodore Roosevelt was a state legislator in New York, FDR was state legislator. Theodore Roosevelt was assistant secretary of the Navy, FDR's assistant secretary of the Navy. Theodore Roosevelt liked big forest conservation. FDR promoted that with the CCC and beyond. Theodore Roosevelt loved big Navy, naval historian. FDR, big Navy. Theodore Roosevelt had Theodore Roosevelt had a niece, Eleanor Roosevelt, and FDR married her. They're synonymous in their styles. It's a story about the Bull Moose Party of 1912, the most successful third party, and the connection between that. We get confused with the D and the R. They both loved the U.S. federal government. They both had a reformer instinct. But Roosevelt's great trick, and the biggest thing, I've never liked that people, there's a great book, but it's called FDR, that, he had a first-class temperament, meaning there was a rap on FDR that he wasn't an intellectual. He wasn't, Eleanor Roosevelt said, well, that might be true, but my husband has a map mind. FDR was one of the greatest postage stamps collectors of his day. Heavy. And he would have a globe, and you could spin a globe and point to anything, and he could tell you about the rivers, the lakes, the topography. He was a map, cardiology was his love and passion. So he really was an intellectual about global affairs, and hence he could bring all the press in, spin the globe, and tell a reporter, pick your place. You want to talk about the Philippines, and off he'd go about things about the Philippines, or off he'd go about Italy. And it was an impressive show. It was unscripted. It played onto his strong suit. And also FDR had the advantage of when the stock market collapsed, you started getting, most reporters were hurt economically. Reporters don't make a lot of money. You don't go to be a journalist to get rich by and large. But he did things like the Federal Writers Project and took unemployed journalists, and suddenly they're getting payday in Chicago or San Francisco or rural Nebraska to write, document our country. So again, it was befriending the literary and journalistic community, and it's why both Roosevelts score high on when you're looking at press relations.
Well, let's talk about FDR for just a moment, because one of the kind of classic images of him are the kind of the fireside chats, this kind of, stepping into people's homes in this very intimate way, utilizing, as the last panel was just talking about, like the emergence of new technologies. At that time, radio was a relatively new technology, right, that was finding its way into more and more homes, particularly in rural places. Can you speak to, like, the FDR's kind of unique moment, kind of this fixture in the American mind because of this proximity at a time when, in fact, that office was really quite distant from people's lives?
When I told you guys the connection FDR and TR, remember in 1920, the year women got the right to vote in suffrage, many women, there wasn't a wave, but women's vote mattered. But many women were attracted to the VP on the ticket, young FDR. But they lost the Democrats in 1920 to Warren Harding. And in 21, after a loss, he just lost on the ticket, he thought, what would Theodore do? And Theodore was big with the Boy Scouts of America. And so he spent 1921, FDR, organizing this massive Boy Scout jamboree in Bear Mountain State Park on the Hudson. And he found the money for it. And it was a free, time spent for underserved communities in the Bronx and Queens, New Jersey, even Delaware had some people there, young Boy Scouts. And they went there, and he played horseshoes with the Boy Scouts, FDR. He had marshmallow roast, threw a softball, all that, and went swimming. And when he went swimming, he contracted the polio virus because the water was dirty and contaminated there. And it's a virus that doesn't manifest itself for a couple days. When he finally found out, he woke up with a migraine, sweating, couldn't move the lower half of his body. Eleanor Roosevelt got him medical attention. Nobody, none of you would want to be anywhere near FDR in 1922 because you were afraid you would catch the virus. So he's sitting at the Hudson alone. He knows nothing to do with his life, FDR, and he creates in Warm Springs, Georgia, a resort for fellow polios, as he called them, written out of this politics. Nobody thought about him until Al Smith in New York invited him to Madison Square Gardens, and he trained, not for the projection of voice, which was remarkable with him, but how just to walk and move his hips, leaning on one son, just to grab the podium. And he didn't want to seem incapacitated. And they got him there to the podium. And he gave this speech, and that people went wild. And New York Times and others, Franklin D. Roosevelt stole the show. And from that speech onwards, he started communicating. And the Republicans of the 20s didn't use radio effectively. FDR being in a New York market, even though upstate, so, Hyde Park's not the city, he became the voice of radio. He ran for governor in 1928 and he ran in 1930. He's starting now in the golden age of radio, and his voice became synonymous. And for the here when you cut to March of 1933, that's when our inaugurals were held in March. And you heard that we have nothing to fear but fear itself, coming out of somebody that couldn't even make the podium or walk. And in those days, the press wouldn't photograph him. We have just a couple of some sneak camera shots of him with the leg braces and all. It was considered gauche for a reporter to photograph him in a awkward position. And now look at our society. All people do is look to get a bad shot of a president. And Roosevelt, as you rightfully said, beamed into homes, that first generation of radio listeners. Now, anywhere in the country, he can go and talk to them. And he made those fireside chats an American tradition, and his voice becomes the voice of the democracy in World War II. If you listen to his speeches, he would put God into a lot of his radio drive. God bless America, or in God we trust. And he kind of unified the country as much as he could through his sort of radio sermons and civic instruction.
So moving beyond that time to our more recent past, but not, up to our present day, how has that changed? Who else has been kind of these instrumental figures in shaping and defining that relationship, right? In some way, I'll let you say.
It's a good question. In many ways, when you follow somebody like Roosevelt with the voice, Harry Truman wasn't that. But Truman was one of our great presidents. Look what Truman does from 1945. FDR dies April 12th, 45. Look how incredible Truman was. But the media didn't give him a press, didn't give him the break. He started getting off in a wrong foot with them. He went ballistic that his daughter's piano recital was mocked at the journalist. And, now the big press line was to air is Truman. Now we go back and look at what his presidency was, and we're living in his security state. He created the Secretary of Defense, the Department of Defense, the National Security Council, the CIA. He created today's U.S. Air Force, Secretary of Air Force. He integrated the armed forces. He is the leader of NATO, which matters so much to us today. He supported Israel in its great time of need and during its creation. He, did the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, and you can go on and on and on. So he's an example of a president, unlike the Roosevelts that the media swooned over, The media didn't care for Truman, yet Truman is one of our, usually ranked as our number 5th most significant president. Eisenhower had the advantage of being Ike, being his book Crusade of Europe was like sold like the Bible when it came out. And while Eisenhower wasn't great at speeches, he carried with him a kind of superhero persona, the way an astronaut would. You're in the room with Neil Armstrong, and oh my God, there's Dwight D. Eisenhower. And he didn't engage with the press a lot, but he didn't get in wars with them. Eisenhower had a view, so what, they think I'm not so smart, I'm that smart. I've had a heart attack, they think I'm reading Western pulp novels, and I'm golfing. And it led to a period where people thought that Eisenhower was not a hands-on president. And then lo and behold, the archive opens up, and we see his handwriting on everything and every policy and the impact of Eisenhower being very great. So Truman got beat up by the press, and Ike was an example of kind of floating like a Macy's parade float, over the crowd, over the press gallery a little bit. And he's now also has a great upward trajectory in history. Kennedy's game-changing with television.
Well, so actually, at the SNF Dialogues, with Anna Kenthia Bustuku last evening, we were talking a little bit about the history of political campaigns, and I actually made a reference to Kennedy and Nixon and the role of television. Can you speak to that? How you see that playing into this theme of media and the presidency and its power?
Well, main thing to keep in mind, because we have a presidential debate coming up in June. This is not part of our American history presidential debates. There were no presidential debates before 1960. People get mistaken because of Lincoln Douglas in Illinois. So there are no presidential debates in U.S. history until 1960. And Nixon, the vice president, for whatever reasons, and we don't have time to get into why, but he agreed to debate Kennedy. 4 debates, televised. And it's almost now an old saw, but the consensus has been that people that watched on television thought Kennedy won, and people that heard on radio thought Nixon won. Now, performed better. The truth of the matter was Kennedy was keenly aware of the power of TV. And I wrote a biography of Walter Cronkite, and in 1952 was our first televised conventions. It was like 2 cameras just honed on the stage. You saw smoke. It was not like today. And Walter Cronkite, TV was such a crippled new kind of industry. He was furious that he didn't get to go to Korea for radio with Edward R. Murrow Cronkite. Anybody good was still in radio in 52. But they honed in on that, and to make extra money, Cronkite did how to put makeup on and not look weird on camera. He made extra money. Sam Rayburn took his class. John F. Kennedy took his class. Nixon did not. Nixon said he despised the new medium of TV, and he underestimated the power of it. And so Kennedy was able to score punches. And in fact, one of his best hits on Nixon was Nixon at one point was talking about his kitchen debate with Nikita Khrushchev, Soviet premier. And he goes, and Nixon is saying, and I told Khrushchev that, we have stoves and, and refrigerators, and that capitalism's better than communism, and that we're going to have color TV soon. And Kennedy looked at him and said, you know what? I will take my television in black and white, but I want to be number 1 in rocket thrust. And if you are president, I see a Soviet flag on the moon. And if I'm president, I see an American flag on the moon. Kind of the beginning of that whole moonshot thing, which President Joe Biden has done such a great job on, the cancer moonshot and bringing awareness, but that term moonshot's being applied many different places.
So let's just stay on
And
Nixon.
the press conference with Nixon. I mean, he invented the press conference with that, charm offense he had and that self-deprecating humor. And he had a perfect foil friend in Helen Thomas who was making zingers at him. And so it came kind of must-watch TV. He really invented the modern televised press conference, Kennedy.
So you just mentioned Nixon, and you have a book about Nixon and some other actors, which is, I think, an interesting way that you often frame these individuals, that they're, these really kind of formative individuals, but it's not only them, right? They're kind of couched within these contexts. So Nixon, and just to talk about both left and right here in some ways, is a fascinating character in some regards because he bucks some of our, aside from everything we were just talking about, he bucks some of these trends of how we would now think about our kind of polarized dynamics of these individuals. Nixon plays a huge role in the kind of the efforts around environmental preservation, right? The EPA and the like. Is it possible for someone today, or can you contextualize Nixon in that moment? Because in so many ways, we would couch him, he's a Republican, but he's doing these things that we would now see as very left-leaning and the like. Could you just make some sense of that historically, and is any of that even possible today as we think about issues?
Remember, Nixon's not Lyndon Johnson. Johnson had like 67 senators. He could get anything passed. Nixon's dealing with Democrats in Congress, Senate. And so he's got to be a triangulator, a compromiser. It's probably the first thing in presidential studies. Here's the president. What's the makeup of Congress and the Senate? And how will that play out? But Nixon loved to defy expectations. That's why in 72 he went to China, the most anti-communist voice, almost an appendage of Joe McCarthy in the 50s, is suddenly now the guy to go meet Zhou Enlai and Mao Zedong on his historic trip. And he did that with the environment. And in China, he manipulated the press that if you're mean to me, or if you were on his hate list, enemies list, you wouldn't get invited to go on the China trip. And he controlled it that way. And so a lot of these reporters were begging to get on. But with the environment, really he was watching, guys, the big thing in media and democracy, or what affects our time, I know this sounds so insignificant, but in 1963, CBS News and then NBC, ABC started doing, it used to be 15-minute televised news. You're reading headlines. CBS goes 30 minutes. Now with commercials, that's 22, but it allowed back-end stories to keep following the way CNN or MS does today. You just follow it, meaning CBS started, we'll do space, we'll do Vietnam, we'll do Martin Luther King, and we'll follow that thread night after night. So towards the end of, say, a Cronkite broadcast, it'd be, Martin Luther King today was in Selma, Alabama, and today he said this, or he was in Chattanooga, and the public would follow. And there was a great backlash from the segregationist right, and that's Democrat and Republican, but segregation South went nuts on CBS. They called it the color broadcasting system. That's none of the southern states would feed CBS's footage. They had to race it to a Catholic school in New Orleans to get a feed of it. And then, by 65, there's that incredible moment when Lyndon Johnson thought that the way to befriend the press is Lady Bird had a CBS affiliate in Austin. So she was in that business. And the president, Dr. Frank Stanton of CBS, was like this with Lyndon. If you had to pick Lyndon Johnson's closest friends, Frank Stanton would be on the top 5 list. And so Lyndon was startled when he saw Morley Safer, Canadian broadcaster from CBS, showing on the nightly news in 65 that there is American Marines or Army, but we're burning huts and we're terrorizing people in Vietnam. That never would have run in World War II. No, on radio. This is the first time in media showing the U.S. Armed Forces as bad people. And it's a long story how CBS ran it, but they ran Morley Safer's piece on the nightly news. And that night in the wee hours, Dr. Frank Stanton's phone rang, and it was Lyndon. And he goes, Frank, you know who this is? And he said, you know, Mr. President? Yes. Do you know it's a terrible day today? Do you know what happened, Frank? And he's like, no, Mr. President, what? He said, your network shit on the American flag in front of millions of people. And Frank said, well, oh, you mean that story? And he said, yeah, and you're a communist reporter. And he said, no, Mr. President, that first off, Morley Safer's from Canada. He's a really smart guy that we have there. He said, Canada, I knew there was something wrong with that boy for doing this to our country. And he got an earful at CBS. And Johnson was unclear. That wasn't the way press was supposed to cover things. You know, Bob Dylan had a song out at that time from Highway 61 Revisited album, you know, where it's the ballad of a thin man, and Dylan, with that voice of his, goes, you know, something is happening and you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones? Mr. Jones in the 60s was the establishment, which whether you were Democrat or Republican, that was the counterculture, the hippies, Students for Democratic Society. Things were unglued, and Johnson's response to CBS was, what is this? What's happening to our country that the media is making our soldiers look bad, and we're at war? Because we were all in it together in World War II, and FDR didn't have that kind of worry as president. So Nixon stumbles out all of that, and he understands the power of it. And the big thing for environment was Nixon noticed Time magazine in '69 put Cuyahoga River on fire, and at the same time Neil Armstrong. And then Nixon knew that Gaylord Nelson, a senator from Wisconsin, was going to hold an Earth Day. And Nixon did not trust the environmentalists, but he really despised a man who kept enemies list. Probably number one on his list was Ed Muskie of Maine, because Nixon thought Muskie was going to run against him in '72, and Muskie was marketing himself as Mr. Clean. Clean government, clean rivers, clean lakes. Nixon loathed it. But all the Democratic senators were attacking Nixon's Vietnam War. McGovern, Eugene McCarthy, Hubert Humphreys, Frank Church, Birch Bayh, just endless. Fulbright. And Scoop Jackson of Washington State was coming from the senator of Boeing of Washington State, was two things: ardent conservation environmentalist, big arm pro-Vietnam. And Nixon cuts a deal with John Dingell and Scoop Jackson through John Ehrlichman, his environmental domestic advisor, and they signed Nixon January 170, changed all of our lives. Nixon shocked the press by signing the NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, which makes anybody building something here has to tell you the environmental impact. What's the environmental impact statement? The reason that matters, it gave birth to environmental law. After that, every company, I don't care if you're ExxonMobil, I don't care if you're Walmart, you're hiring environmental lawyers to deal with all these issues of where a new store and is it and then Nixon went on, signed, Clean Air Act of '70. But guess, guys, what the Endangered Species Act of 1973 passed by? 92-0 in the Senate. Now you're seeing the Trump administration trying to undo the Endangered Species Act, undo Clean Air and Clean Water Acts. What the Trump movement wants to do is undo Nixon's environmental record. But Nixon was playing it for himself. History, I'm not into the environment, but if people are, I'll get credit. So he created the EPA in 1970. And so, it's an example. And CBS News covered Earth Day as if it was the moonwalk. John Lindsay, New York, and what I don't see happening in the media culture of today like that is you don't see what, if there is such a thing as mainstream media, they'll follow a trial, they'll follow a storyline, and they'll follow campaigns and all, but they don't pick like an issue. Cronkite came in 1970, had all that power, said 1970 is going to be the year of the environment. We're going to just run it to get some good policy done. And out of them doing that, you start getting, because imagine if the media every day, all ABC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, NPR, every day began with climate change. Every day, climate. But they don't do that anymore because they're reading polling and they're watching how the ratings, and they're judging how to carry a news story, not from instinct or heart, but solely by your viewership or listeners' audience.
So, and maybe this is one of the last questions I want to ask, but it's an important one, I think, just especially in light of what you're just talking about bias of the media. How do you make sense of, or kind of assess, the sense of media bias in reporting on the presidency? Have you seen, particular trends in any of these, administrations in particular, or is there more of a, kind of an ebb and flow, but it's pretty consistent in some ways?
Watergate is such an epic moment, of course, and Woodward and Bernstein's accomplishment of just dogged journalism actually brought down a president. I mean, forced Nixon to resign. But remember, Lyndon Johnson didn't run again in '68 because of Vietnam coverage. And I've read letters from Cronkite worried about it. He said, we've just taken down 2 presidents, they being the press. We took down Johnson, we've taken out Nixon. Well, let's not take out Jerry Ford. We just, Ford caught the break of some of that intensity, and Jimmy Carter started picking up on going after Carter. But with Carter, it was going after his Southern accent, the way he said nuclear, the way he had a brother Billy Carter who was drinking beer, the way that he'd wear blue jeans, the way that he was one of our most intellectual presidents. I mean, really brilliant man, Jimmy Carter, was turned into some sort of country hee-haw buffoon because of by the national media. And that starts this kind of trending of it. Reagan had the advantage of presidency of Mike Deaver and Nancy Reagan and their Hollywood connections back then to understand stage crafting. And they were, we're looking now, June 6th, the anniversary of D-Day. Do you realize in 1984, re-election, Ronald Reagan, in February of 1984, he had when he ran against Walter Mondale, when he ran his second term, that he had a 27% approval rating, Reagan, in foreign policy. 20s. That's how bad people thought he was his first term. And then he went to Normandy. And Peggy Noonan wrote that speech, and it was all about how to blanket it on TV. Dolan wrote one, and Noonan, and these 2 speeches were marketed to what mattered then. Good Morning America, Today's Show, how to do it with a campaign of hit that and then turn Social Security Truman Democrats, strip them away and do the flag. And claim the flag, Reagan wanted to do, because they recognized Vietnam veterans didn't get a parade. They were booed and hissed. So let's celebrate the American armed forces and our of World War II and Korea and Vietnam. Stand up in the audience if you served, after that. And you watch him uptick on foreign affairs simply on reminding people of the valor of D-Day. And Reagan said, let's try to get the media off Pearl Harbor and turn them on D-Day. That we won the Battle of Normandy. We didn't win the Battle of Pearl Harbor. So let's claim D-Day as our MO. And it's amazing how Reagan was able to reinvent his poll numbers after that trip.
So I'm going to ask you, we have just a couple more minutes. So I want to ask you maybe a couple quick questions. How do you view the media's role in a functioning democracy, especially as it relates to presidential accountability?
I can't tell you how important the Fourth Estate is. and how much we as citizens need to respect the work that journalists and writers do covering things around the world. You know, we all know who a TV television person, but we're dealing with journalists being killed all over the world at all times, putting themselves in really risk ways. If we don't have a free press, our democracy is doomed. It's why and I'm not here to be partisan in any meaningful way, except to say when Donald Trump called the press the enemy of the people, it was in my mind, one of the worst and lowest ebb statements a president could say. To have that much disrespect, to try to turn that group of people as the enemy. Does that mean there's not reckless, irresponsible people masquerading under the name of journalism that are making things deeply chaotic, especially since social media and now AI? Of course, it's horrible. But we also have to constantly remind ourselves of the good journalists for not a lot of money are working and working and working. And, you know, I think that national news is different. Local news and around America, people like local news more. They're getting their local news. It's the blending of entertainment and now the curse, which may be number one of our time, is misinformation. How do we know fact from fiction? Where do we know? You know what Walter Cronkite told me? I had spent time with him. I used to be the historian for CBS, and I mentioned a book. He said, I asked him once, I said, what's the thing that concerns you the most about the United States? And he said, the iPhone. Meaning because we're turning kids into the worldwide information and misinformation, hate sites, pornography, with no guide manual. When I was a kid, he said, I was at Lanier Middle School, I'd have to take typing and you get trained. But we're not training anybody how to properly use all of this information / misinformation. We're not saying Reuters is this or AP is this. You can trust this that's fact-checked and vetted. I just wrote an essay about Chicago for Vanity Fair. And even today, the grueling fact-checking that goes on to a story like that, at some point you start feeling silly because so much and I'm trying to be perfect and I'm making mistakes that you need a fact checker and people are just flying stuff unfact checked. So it's chaotic and actually horrible out there. But that doesn't mean where the attack should be on the fourth estate, because if we don't have that fourth estate, how can our democracy function? So I think we need summits and we need to get together leaders, not just of, with AI, but of social media, of Facebook and Google and Amazon and Apple. And how do we start? Those companies made their money on fact-based information. Do we want to give AI bad information? I mean, don't big tech companies have a responsibility to, with AI coming our way, to make sure that it's accurate information, not false information. And there are, I know it's an overused word, guardrails, safety manual, whatever. It's not there, and that's not the reporter's fault. I mean, we're just going to have to, as a country, take on that technology for all the good it's doing in medicine and elsewhere, but find a way to make sure that if somebody's going to be doing stories, and I have a student using AI for classes, they're using fact-based information, or we're going to be living in this in a even more chaotic America than we are right now.
And the very last thing I will ask, and you are a historian, so I'm going to ask you about the future. And actually, Mike Nelson, if he's somewhere in the room here, I'm going to say futurist here. I'm still not totally sure what that word really means. Based on your expertise, your research, knowing so much about so many, thinking about the presidents, what advice would you give to, I'll say current, but I would also frame this as future presidents managing their relationship with the media?
It's horrible to be president and you're living now. I mean, in this regard, everybody is firing at you at all the time. I think Johnson said it's like standing in a hailstorm naked and the hail's just pounding on you every day and there's nothing you can do. You just stand there and have to take it. and I empathize with that. On the other hand, one thing Reagan was able to do, I noticed, is he humanized the press to this degree. There'd be sharp exchanges, but then he'd say, hey, there's free food over there. Or, hey, guys, there's that donut shop across the street. It was Hallmark hammy. But he took the temperature down a little bit of the room by doing that. So even if you were a liberal reporter that didn't like him, you couldn't say he wasn't looking at you with a sense of humanity. When I listen to Trump talk to and at the press, it's to degrade, humiliate, and in that way, I find that in any part of our life, I don't enjoy watching any human do that to anybody else. So I think trying to maintain some decorum and dignity, you can have these flash moments, heated moments, but then you can also say, hey, I've got a little out of hand today, repair, say some human things, and try to keep it so we're not just living with constant acrimony.
Well, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to have some conversation around the presidency and the relationship with the media. It's such an important way to think about such an important office, and also recognizing that media plays such a critical role in the health and vibrancy of our democracy that is well beyond just one person.
And I'll end by telling you, Wilmington has done a great job it's just beautiful downtown here. And it's just walking and being here, and the revitalization and renovation, and the fact that you have history across your street, and the way you're treating being the first in the country, it's impressive. And I hope to be back for our 250th anniversary of America, where Delaware should be front and center. And so thank you, Biden School. Thank you, my friend. And we'll carry on. Bye.
Thanks so much.